It's one of the most crazy sections of Scripture, probably in the book of Genesis, I would have to say, because of what ends up happening in this account. And what we're going to talk about is Jacob we've talked about last few weeks, we talked about how Jacob stole the blessing, how he and his brother have been at odds with each other, and mom and dad have been sort of at odds with each other in regards to their favoritism they show toward their children. And now Jacob, because he stole the blessing, is being forced to flee, and kind of the cover by which he's being forced to flee is what? Anybody remember? That Rebekah, said that he should flee for this reason. What was the reason? Well, but she didn't say that was the reason. That's what she convinced Isaac to go get a wife. Yeah, to go get a wife. And so I want to take you back and look at something here. Open up to Genesis 27 for a moment. It's interesting that even Esau still doesn't get it at this point. Look at verse 46 at the end there of chapter 27, and then kind of read down through to verse 9 of chapter 28. I'll just get one person to read that. Bill, you want to read that for us? Down to verse 9 to 28. Padan Aram. Sent away Jacob. Padan Aram.
Unto Laban, son of Bethuel, Syrian, brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away from Pandarium. I can't get that one.
I know.
Take him a wife of fence, and that he blessed him. He gave him a charge, saying, Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughter of Canaan. And that Jacob obeyed his father and his mother, and was gone to
Padan Aram.
Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father, then went Esau into Ishmael, and took unto the wife which he had
Maalath.
daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Rebekah, to be his wife.
All right, so this is kind of just a side note account right here. Rebekah is convincing Isaac that he needs to send Jacob off to go get married to someone that's of their household, of their family, which again, you've seen this already. This is not new. This has been from the very beginning. We've seen that, right? Been this close marriages that have been going on. Even Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, their marriages obviously had to have been close relation, right? And so the daughters of the Canaanites are concerning, and it was a grief to both Isaac and Rebekah that Esau had married some daughters of the Canaanites. He's got two of them, right? Remember that? Two of them that he's married to. But so when he sees this, trying to get on the good side with his mom and dad, what does he do to try to make things better? Go get a third wife. This time, the wife is from Ishmael, who's the son of Abraham, thinking, well, if he's part of Abraham's family, hey, there we go. This will make it better. Let me ask you a question. Can adding more things to your wrong somehow make it right? No. But this just kind of gives you further insight into Esau and what he understands as right and wrong, righteousness, the promised line of the Messiah. It's like he's trying to get back in on it, though he knows he's already lost it. I think it just goes to show you his heart. He didn't have a spiritual heart for this. His heart wasn't really in it. Did Jacob? No, but God already promised that Jacob would be the one. Okay? I mean, so that's important to remember on this thing. Huh? Yeah, 70s, in his 70s, and he doesn't have a wife yet. Yeah, and he's going to get married here in just a few minutes. Well, a few miles. Huh? Mom wouldn't let him have one. Now, I will say, do you get the idea that they're still living under their mom and dad's authority quite a bit? The fact that they were sent, they were told what to do, both of them were. And so there's this kind of a very, you say, is that normal? I don't know whether it was normal or not in that time frame for them to live that long under their parents' authority and still be following their parents' leadership at that time. I don't know if this is just a unique family. It could be. You understand what I'm saying? There's all sorts of things that are confusing about this family. Jacob and Esau and Isaac and Rebekah, all sorts of things. Now, what we're going to continue to read is what happened as Jacob leaves. And this is really quite an amazing thing. This is going to show us that God's grace extends beyond all the stupidity of humanity and ridiculous things that humanity does. And he's still going to continue his plan despite all the evils that have gone on up to this point through this family. So what we're going to do, read verses 10 through 22 of chapter 28. So let's split it up into groups of 5. We got Bill. He read a good chunk here, so I'm going to see if we can get someone else first, and then we'll go around here if we get back to Bill. Okay, 10 to 15. I'm going to give you to 15. 16 to 20. 16 to 20. And then you want to read those last 2 verses again, Bill? Okay. 21 and 22. Huh? It might be Padan Aram if you're having trouble pronouncing that name. Padan Aram. Remember Padan, last name here of the Padans. And then Aram at the end. Yeah. Go ahead.
Jacob went out from Bathsheba, went for Aram, and he lighted upon a certain place, and tarried there all night, because the sun was set. And he took the stones of that place, and put them for his pillows, and lay down on that place to sleep. And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder stood up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angel of God descended on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it, and said, I am the Lord, God of Abraham thy father, and the God of Isaac. The land wherein thou liest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed. And thy seed shall be as the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. And in thee and in thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And behold, I am with thee, and I will keep thee in all places where thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee till I have done that which I have spoken to thee.
Okay, 16.
So that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God. And this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth into thee.
Okay. So Jacob, on the travel, in the journey, he has a dream at night. And someone give me a little description of the dream. What's it say?
Oh, I was going to say, if I had to sleep on 2 stones, it'd be a nice comfortable.
Yeah, when he says pillows, you got to think of this not like laying my head, but more like tilting you back, kind of, kind of being able to sleep in kind of like in a chair. Yes, it'd be rough. That's just part of the. You're traveling. I don't know. He might have brought some drop cloths or something with him, something to add a little bit of cushion to his his pillows. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and describe the dream he has. Tell me about it. A ladder from earth to heaven. Okay. Okay, and who's standing at the top of it? God is standing at the top. Now, the word ladder can also can be translated stairway. So you get that it can be the same way, a stairway or a ladder. It's either way, okay, in the description. The image here that we have of the fact that there's a ladder, anybody kind of got an idea between earth and heaven, what that seems to describe in some sense? That there's a connection between heaven and earth. What would we call that connection? A connection, okay. Has anyone ever heard of someone that's called a mediator, one that goes between another? The ladder is a picture of God's mediation. There's something in between God and man. And the fact that God has not removed himself away from man to the point that there's no connection to man. There's a connection going on. And then we see in the picture as well of the dream, we see the angels going up and down from God to man and from man back to God. What does that obviously tell us is happening on this ladder? Prayers and God doing his business through that mediation process. Okay? This is... So we get this type of interaction between heaven and earth through this ladder where God is doing business to man or with man and man with God through this ladder. And then Jacob, when he awakes, how does he respond to this dream that he is seeing? Yeah, he was moved with fear. So why was it so fearful? Because he's in the place of God now. He realizes he's been given a vision from God, and it's nothing small or insignificant. It's something very fearful. It's kind of like Moses coming to the burning bush, and you just came into a place that's holy that you need to take your shoes off. You're on holy ground. That's the kind of fear he's got when he wakes up. You're on holy ground. You just were in the presence of God in this vision. Or like Isaiah had a vision like that, where he saw the Lord high and lifted up in his temple, and it says he was moved with fear. He said, "Woe is me." Remember, that was his attitude toward it. It's sort of like, for the first time, maybe you could say, Jacob is having a reality of the God who his parents have been telling him all about, like he's first and foremost. I can't say he's never had anything before that, but it obviously he hasn't lived in the fear of the Lord up to this point, has he? Not the kind of way he's been living. And he's been struck with that fear. Okay? Yeah, it's been a reality check. How does he mark the place or identify the place? Gets his pillow and makes a pillar out of it, right? It's a big pillow. Yeah, that's what I said. If we weren't looking at little tiny rocks, we're looking at something that was more like big boulders that he probably leaned up against and rested. So he sets it up as a pillar, as a kind of an altar place. And then what's it say he does with that altar? Anoints it with oil. And then what does he do? He vows to God. He renames the place. What's he named the place, by the way? Bethel. Anybody know what Bethel means? House of God, yes. Beth means house. El means God. Okay? So we got house of God. But he makes some vows. And his vows are this: if I return in peace to my father's household. You know what he's saying here? He's hoping that since God is going to bless him, that he will someday he did say you're going to return back to your land that you're being driven away from, is that things can be made right with him and his brother, right with him and his dad, him and his mom, which again, he's never going to get to see her, but at least that's maybe part of his thoughts going on in his mind. And then he promises that whatever I'm gained in all of this blessing that I'm going to get, I'm going to give how much? 10%. Look at that. This is way before the requirement of tithes in the Old Testament law. We're looking at way before the time of Moses. Moses hasn't come on the scene yet, and that's where the law was given at the time of Moses, right? Where they were to give a 10% all the time. This is out of his own heart. Is this the first time we've seen someone out of Abraham's family give a tithe or make a promise of a tithe? Abraham himself did it, right? Who did he do it with? Can you remember that name? Melchizedek. Melchizedek, after that battle where he fought those kings with his men and delivered Lot out of the hand of those people. All right. Anybody notice something that God repeated at this point? Yeah, the exact same blessing that was given to Abraham, that was given to Isaac, is now being promised to Jacob. It's like God had to pull Jacob away from his family and that mess that was going on to finally really single him out for this purpose. It's the same meaning. It's the same meaning. When we're talking about the stars of heaven or the dust of the earth, it's the same understanding. It's too much to number what I'm going to make you. I'm going to make you a mighty nation. Now, when we think about that and understand what he means by that, it can have both a physical meaning as well as a spiritual meaning. Physical in the sense that Israel isn't going to be a small nation forever. It hasn't even really become a nation yet, but it will become a nation that's big, gigantic, so big that Egypt, when they were in the land of Egypt, that they were fearful of the people. They were so big. But it has more than just the physical descendant promise. It's dealing with spiritual descendants. People who are going to believe like your father Abraham did. People who are going to believe in the same Redeemer that Isaac had and that Jacob is now receiving for the very first time. That Redeemer. In fact, the very vision he saw points to that Redeemer. Did you notice that? The fact that there's God, there's man, then there's a mediator between God and man. And God is doing his business through that mediator. Go to John chapter number 1. Just hold your place. We're going to come back to Genesis 29, so hold your place. But look at John chapter number 1, verse 49 through 51. And if I get 3 readers right up here up front. TJ, get 49. Do really loud for us. Shy, 50. And Andrew, 51. John chapter 1, verse 49 through 51. You getting it? Well, you're away. You got to go in the Gospel of John. Gospel of John. Okay, go ahead and start us off, TJ. And verse 51. Real loud for us.
Hereafter ye shall see heaven open and the angels of God
Ascending, descending, Son of Man. Did you see him, Jesus referring to that vision? He's referring to Jacob's ladder's vision, isn't he? And he says, you're going to see heaven open, you're going to see angels ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. That he's the mediator that Jacob's vision was about. Right? That he's the one that is the go-between. He's the one that God has placed to reach man and God at the same time. There's this connection between God and man through this one mediator. So, it's similar to what God said to Abraham when he said, look to the stars and count them. It's like God is giving them the gospel continually. Or Genesis 12, where he says, in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. The book of Galatians says that was the gospel being preached unto Abraham. That he heard the gospel, that there's going to come a Redeemer who's going to bless all the families of the earth through you. And he understood the gospel to that point. And it's like that's what's happening for the first time. Is this Jacob's salvation point? I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint some of them. Obviously, Abraham's is easy because it says he believed and the Lord counted it to him for righteousness. I don't know. But it does appear that for the first time, Jacob is somewhat being opened up to the things of God and to the Messiah and to what this is all about, what this whole blessing thing's all about. Okay? So we get that. Questions? Thought? Yeah, I think it's probably physical sleep at this point. I think we don't want to read too much into it if it doesn't say. You let the Scripture explain itself. That seems to be pretty clear. He just woke out of a dream. But it does, by his response, it does appear that this is something new to his heart, that he is, for the first time, come to a reality. In fact, he says it at the end. Did you see that in verse 21? If I come to my Father's house in peace, so shall the Lord be my God. It's kind of a way of saying, I'm going to get my heart right with him then, at this point. So there is that seeming to be the thought. All right, so we got a lot of reading here coming up here. There's going to be Jacob getting to Padan Aram, and we're going to see him meeting up with his soon-to-be wife, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah. You think, what a mess. It is a mess, okay? But we're going to see what ends up happening out of this thing, okay? So I need some split people. Genesis 29, 1 to 5. Okay, 6 to 10. 11 to 20. 11 to 20. 11 to 15. 16 to 20. 16 to 20. We're going to have to do kind of go-arounds again. 16 to 20, 21 to 25. Okay, 21, and then 26 to 30. Sold. He's got that one. Sold. All right, go ahead and get her going. Yep. Okay, so let's kind of get some interesting things going here. We're going to ask some questions. Who did Jacob encounter at the well, and what did they inform him of? Okay. Yeah. Well, first he meets some shepherds, and then the shepherds point him to the daughter of Laban. And who's Laban? What do you find out about who is Laban? We've already found out about him before. The brother of Rebekah, which is his mother. So basically Laban is his uncle, Uncle Laban, okay? When they point out, the shepherds point out Rachel, how does he respond? What'd you say, Bill? When he sees Rachel coming with sheep? How does he respond to Rachel when he finds out who she is? He takes the cover of the well. Yeah, he opened, yeah. Yeah, he rolled the stone away from the top of the water of the well. And then, as he said there, greeted her with kisses. And it says he wept aloud. Presumably, probably for joy. Does this event sound similar, somewhat similar to Isaac's getting his wife with that servant? That the servant is sent by Abraham to go get Isaac a wife. And where do they end up meeting at? Probably the same well. And but it's reversed because it's Jacob who goes and takes care of the water issue as opposed to Rebekah taking care of the water issue in the previous vision or previous account. Okay. So how does Rachel respond when she finds out this is Jacob, this is Rebekah's son? Yeah, she ran and told her father. Now, I want you to get this. Who is Rachel then in relation to Jacob? Cousins. First cousins. She's a first cousin. Yes, first cousin. Okay. So again, what do we see that the Bible has as when we're talking about marriage in the very beginning? Close relation marriage. Okay. It does happen, and you think about it, going, I said it's all the way back to the very beginning. It's been that way. Adam and Eve. You think about Adam married his rib, if you get it right. He married one that was made of his own flesh, and then you think about the children that come out of them had to have been marrying within that family. So there were no other families. So, and this was okay. It was acceptable at that time. It doesn't. When does it become acceptable or unacceptable? I'm sorry. When does it become unacceptable? No, not after Christ. In the Bible's time, when does God start saying this shouldn't be anymore? It's at Moses' time when close relations are forbidden. Okay? It might not be the best thing. Okay. Well, biblically speaking, we see that the Bible gives us a timeline when that happens. So things do change. Laws do change, and allowances do change as they are necessary to change from time to time. You understand that? I mean, there's some things that there's no need for a law until somebody does something that hurts somebody, so you make a law to forbid that from happening again. Do you realize that? I mean, that's how laws get made for the most part, because of something that's happening that needs to be stopped when we're realizing it's causing some kind of a conflict to others. So that does happen. And in this case, it might be that it was hurting people genetically, even having that close of a relation. And so there was a commandment not to have that close of a marriage anymore. So let's go on. How's Jacob received by Laban? He's kissed and invited into Laban's home. And he lives with Laban for at least a month, right up at the very beginning, just stays with him. And if you get the idea, what is Jacob doing in his house? He's working for him. And he's working for free, sort of like just a family member, just helping out around the house, doing whatever's needed. And finally, it bothers Laban enough that he decides to further this relationship in another way. How? No. Wants to pay him for working. He says, "You're my family." He says, "And I should be paying you to do this. You're not." It's sort of kind of a. You're not a servant. That's kind of what he's saying. You're not somebody that works for me on a regular basis because he's part of my household. You're a family member. You're different than that. I should be paying you for doing what you're doing. You kind of get that attitude going on? And so he says, "Set your wages. Ask me what you want me to pay you, and I will be willing to work it out with you." And what does Jacob... Well, before we even get to that, the narrator of the account, found in verse 16 here, lists us the two daughters of Laban. What's their names? Leah and Rachel. And it gives a description of them. One of them being tender-eyed. We'll talk about that in just a minute. And the other one being beautiful. And what is Jacob, who's he attracted to? Who does he want? Right? He wants the one that's beautiful and well-favored, right? Tender-eyed is put in contrast to beautiful and well-favored. So what do you think tender-eyed means? I don't know that it means she has nice eyes. I get the idea. What do you think? Might be. Yeah, some of the things I've read on it said that it might have been a reference to some kind of blemish on her face. Nobody knows, but it's obviously in contrast to beautiful. You get the idea here? And Jacob is naturally attracted to one that's more beautiful than the one who's got problems, whatever the problem is, that's not near as attractive, right? Uh-huh. The sparkle in her eye? Possible. I'm not sure they were wearing full veils like that. I think that was something that a bride would wear right before she would be married. And she would, when she gets engaged, she'd wear the veil until marriage. But I'm not sure that I know we're looking at Middle Eastern culture, but a lot of that's Islamic stuff, and that was way before this time, or this was way before that time. So started. So yeah, I don't know the culture fully how that would be. But it was obviously, we understand, she didn't appear as beautiful to him as Rachel did. Okay? Now, what does Jacob ask for? He says, "I want Rachel for what?" 7 years if you'll let me marry Rachel. And we read the account, it says that he works for her 7 years, and it's like what to him? Just a few days for his love for Rachel. I mean, it's like it passed the time away. I mean, he was so excited about getting married to this young lady that his workload didn't seem like work at all. It was so... Well, if he was 77, how old was he when you had 7 more years? 84 years old? It always flies when you're getting older, right? Okay. So, how does Laban respond to Jacob's request for a wife? They're going to get married, right? What does he do in the marriage plan? Sets up a big feast, invites all the people out, puts the veils on, and what goes around comes around. Right? What you did to Daddy those 7 years ago is now coming back on you. I don't know. Does God have a sense of humor? Yeah, I think this was, he was probably laughing, going, you got it. You saw what you did to your dad? It's coming back. And what happened when he realized the next morning had happened? Remember, veil's up. That's the best I can explain. I'm not getting into any more details than that. Okay? He finds out by the morning, this was not the one I thought I married. This was Leah. And he goes to Uncle Laban, and he's furious. And what does Uncle Laban try to tell him? Yeah, you should have known this custom. So to Laban, the reason why Laban's doing this is because he's a deceiver just like Jacob, isn't he? He's a deceiver, and he's trying to get whatever he can get out of Jacob. And he's going to use his daughters as a way to get all this, what he would say, free work out of Jacob. And so he's got 7 years already from him. Now he says, if you want to have the next one, another 7 years. 14 years of work for his wives. Now, it says here that he lets Rachel marry him a week after this wedding. So there was 1 week, he gets married, then the next week he gets married to the other one. But he's kind of married her on credit, if you think about it this way, because now he owes Laban 7 more years. And so he works for him for 7 more years to pay off his debt. Does this sound like what goes around comes around? You know, we talk about, you hear people talk about karma. That's kind of a Middle Eastern, Asian type of philosophy. That's not what this is. This is you reap what you sow, is what's happening. That principle works for everybody. Nobody gets away with anything. Even though we might think we do, we don't. Everybody has consequences for sin. Everybody has consequences for everything they do. You can't. The bill will always come due eventually.
It seems funny that the first 7 years went by just a few days.
Like a few days.
Didn't have no wives.
Yeah.
Now he's got 2 wives. It doesn't say anything about the next 7
It probably, yeah, misery broke out. You know, here's something we're going to talk about here we're going to look at here in just a moment. Is it, you say, well, the Bible doesn't seem to condemn this for all this time. It happens all the way through the Old Testament, where you see these people being married to more than one. But then you get to the New Testament, and there's commentary made about what this is supposed to be done. When Jesus was asked about marriage, remember what he said? He said it was demonstrated in the very beginning. In the very beginning, Adam and Eve, and that was it. And he said, what God has joined together, let not man put asunder. There was not Adam and Eve and Rachel and Diana and whoever that he could have all of them. It was only 2. It was 2 for 1, the 2 that became 1. So the standard was already set. Now, I will ask the question for you to think about reasonably when you look in the Scripture in the Old Testament. Is there ever a commandment given? There might be a pattern given, but is there a commandment given? You should never marry more than one yet. Up to this point, has there been? No. Is there, by the time you get into the law of Moses, are there some commandments given? There is some bit. It doesn't say one man for one woman, but there is one thing that's said about kings. Anybody remember what God told the kings that would come on the scene in Israel's time? They are not to multiply to themselves wives. Right? So I would think if it's the king has that commandment, maybe it'd probably be good that the ones under the king should follow it as well, right? But again, it's not strictly said, and it's not strictly held to. Okay? What about now? The rules weren't necessarily set. How do you deal with that? Because I've had people come to me and say, well, how do we deal with that? Because, it seems like God is allowing that, accepting that, going on with that. And why is it wrong now if they were doing it back in the Old Testament time? Well, because the New Testament actually sets the pattern correct. It reinstates what was originally there, right? So we could say all of that can be washed away in the sense of their viewpoint of how marriage is supposed to be, because Jesus set the standard, didn't he? He corrected the standard. And then we see it in other places in the New Testament where it talks about husband of one wife and so forth. So there's some of those thoughts said. But I will say that God gives his commentary on it quite a bit throughout the Old Testament. Almost every time you see where there's this multiple marriage issue going on, multiple wives issue going on, it always causes trouble. Every time it causes trouble. And Jacob is no exception to this. You're going to look at the misery of a man. You want to be married to all these wives? Fine, but you're going to find how miserable it is to be in that condition. Because they aren't going to like each other, and they're going to compete with each other for him, and their children are going to be at odds with each other. I mean, all that kind of stuff's going to happen. That's how we get the whole story of Joseph being sold into slavery. As we get a little bit later, it comes out of this whole multiple marriage thing. Okay? So remember that when you see that. I'm not meaning to go into that topic. Maybe another topic that can be brought up out of this just indirectly for a moment is this whole idea of the idolatry of love, where people will do anything to have love, to have a relationship. Willing to sell 14 years of my life away for what's going to be a mess in the end. And what do you think that did to Rachel and Leah? Where Leah was basically made to know very clear she was not wanted. And yet she got thrown into this thing. And she goes through this whole system where she's trying to have children to get her husband to love her. And when she starts having children, maybe he'll love me here. She says it more than one time. Maybe he'll finally turn his affection toward me now. When we set that as our pattern or our understanding of what love is supposed to look like. Is that how love's supposed to look? Is that the attitude of love? Not at all, is it? So we do see that also playing out and having its... Gary, right? Glad to have you here, Gary. So we do see that as something as a lesson to learn, is that at one point you'll see that Leah does finally have a child, and she recognizes, now I will praise the Lord, verse 35. She kind of came to the place where she came to her understanding that having someone love me is not the best thing to have. Having the Lord accept me is the best thing to have. Can we make an idol out of people? An idol out of a relationship? Yeah. So it's important to note that and to look at that. Okay? All right. Let's go on a little bit further. I'm going to hand out a worksheet for you where you're going to get to see this is where the 12 tribes of Israel come from. And we're going to kind of go quick and try to see if we can list out these real quick. So if you'll pass these out for me. And we're going to try to see where they all come from. The 12 tribes come out of the 12 children of Jacob. Okay? I'm going to be quick because this is going to take us some time, and I don't want us to run out of our time here to get through this. So get everybody to get a worksheet here. Pass it down to Gary over here. Okay, we'll get her started here. Who wants to read the top there for me? Go ahead, Bill. Thanks. Okay, there's a lot said in that, so what we're going to do, I'm going to let you take the time to look it up, but I will give them to you right now but I'm going to challenge you to do your own homework on the back of this, okay? So Leah, how many children you're thinking will come from Leah? You've got Reuben, which is the firstborn. So go ahead and write Reuben, R-E-U-B-E-N. Simeon, Levi, Simeon, S-I-M-E-O-N, Levi. Judah, Judah's an important one, don't we know about Judah? It's the one that creates the tribe of Judah, right? He's an important, not Judas, Judah. Is that what you're saying? Thinking of Judas in the New Testament? Okay. Change it, yeah. Judah. Issachar, let me spell that for you. I-S-S-A-C-H-A-R. I-S-S-A-C-H-A-R. Issachar. And Zebulun. Z-E-B-U-L-U-N. Okay, so how many did she have? 6. 6 of the tribes of Israel come out of her. Okay? And that's seems to be a bit of an interesting thing that plays out, because if you read the account, Leah just keeps having children and Rachel can't have any, and it's almost like it becomes a show of who's a better wife. Leah is better than Rachel, even though Jacob loves Rachel. Yeah. It's almost like God is mocking this whole issue that's going on as well in the way this is happening. You say, what about Zilpah and Bilhah? How did they get into this? Well, in the midst of that, there's not only is there competition between the original wives, but now you've got competition between their handmaids. Yeah. And now, when it says the handmaids are passed on, Zilpah is Leah's handmaid. She has Gad, G-A-D, and Asher. And interesting to note that both Rachel and Leah name these children. Leah names Zilpah's children. Rachel names Bilhah's children. You say, why? Because they're adopting them as their own. Remember, did we see anybody doing that earlier? If I remember doing that happen? How that played out in a real negative consequence? Abraham and Sarah decided to try to do something like this with Hagar, yeah. Okay, and then we got Rachel, and Rachel has children last. Okay, she doesn't have them really close. Hers are last of all the women. Joseph. No, Bilhah had some too. Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin, and those are the last of the 2 sons that come out of that would make up the tribes of Israel. But Bilhah does have some. You have 2 that come out of these: Dan and Naphtali. Naphtali is N-A-P-H-T-A-L-I. N-A-P-H-T-A-L-I. All right. So that's what you kind of got playing out here. You should have 12. Now there's one that's missing. Did anybody notice that there was a name that was missing? If you're familiar with that account, there's a name that's missing. It's a lady, a girl. It's the only daughter that Jacob has. Her name is Dinah. And where does Dinah come from? She's born to who? The one that seems to have all the children. Which one is it? Leah. Okay? She's born to Leah. Okay? All right. So let's look at here. In fact, I guess some of these questions here I've already asked. Who named the sons born to the maidservants? The mothers, the original wives, Rachel and Leah did. Okay? Who was the eldest son? Reuben. So he should be the firstborn, shouldn't he? And receive firstborn rights. Does he end up receiving firstborn rights if you remember the rest of the book of Genesis? He ends up getting jumped out, and it's actually given to somebody else. And we'll see that. We'll see that later. I'll show you that when we get to it, okay? And there's a reason why he ends up losing it. Because he does something pretty dumb. Pretty dumb, and yeah. He hurts himself and his father and other things, okay? Who's the only daughter mentioned? I already said that one. Who was it? Dinah. Number 4, what more do you learn about the relationship between Jacob and his wives? If you haven't read the account, this is probably something you're going to find out. Did they get along with each other? No, there was constant strife. Constant strife. Rachel is the one that Jacob loves, and he despises Leah, and they use their children to try to manipulate. And it's horrible. And by the time they end up coming back into the land of Canaan, where you have these 12 sons are at odds with each other. Every one of them is at odds. And they're especially at odds with the 2 boys that came out of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin. And it doesn't stop there. Again, I'm giving you a heads up. The favoritism doesn't stop. The favoritism keeps going on. What does Jacob do with the firstborn out of Rachel? Gives him the coat of many colors, a way of saying he's the firstborn child to me among all the rest. And honors him and refuses to let him go and work and has him being trained and taught like he's the best. And that's the one that gets kidnapped by the rest and sold as a slave. So, I mean, the family mess just keeps going on. It's from one generation to the next, this mess of problems. Too much drama. Does this not tell us about how good God is despite the evils of men? And God's plan to redeem mankind through this, and specifically through this family? Just a mess. The one that actually is the head of them later is Judah, right? We know Judah is where Christ comes out of. Is Judah a clean guy? We're going to find out that Judah's got a big mess as well. Horrible, awful things he does. Okay? But things will change. Okay. Last question. What is significant about these 12 sons? They become the leaders of the nation of Israel. They are the 12. They lead the 12 tribes of Israel. Yep. Yeah. So this tells us that if you got a terrible past, that doesn't mean God can't use you. If you got some awful things that you got in your history, that doesn't mean God can't use you. Because He's used awful people before to do His greatest work in this world. So remember that. Okay, let's finish with some questions and then we'll be done here. Again, I'll challenge you to take this home this afternoon. Did anybody fill out that worksheet that I gave last week? I know Bill did. Anybody else do it? Good. Darla did. Anybody else work on? You lost yours? Did you lose yours the moment you walked out the door? Okay. All right. Keep working on these. So I would challenge you to go and read the account at least, to kind of get more familiar with it. Just because we don't have a lot of time today to go through and look at all of that. Read what actually plays out and some of the stuff that happens. Okay, number 1 on some ending questions here. Have you ever experienced turmoil in your family like we see recorded here in the life of Jacob? And I'm not asking you for examples. I'm asking for a yes or no. Okay, and how does this passage bring you hope? We may not have had the same thing, but can we say that God can use messy people? He does. By the way, is there anybody in this world that's not a mess to God? All of us have sinned. All of us are guilty before God. And yet God still chooses to use people like us. All right, number 2. Was it wrong for Jacob to take cousins or 2 women as his wives and their servants to father more children? Not technically yet. Why? We discussed it in the lesson. Huh? There was no commandment against it yet. Is there going to eventually become commandments and rules set? Yes. Was there a pattern already set though? Yes. Who was the pattern that God gave? Adam and Eve. And just to make it very clear, he said, for this cause shall a man leave father and mother. He was actually pointing to their marriage as an example to follow. But pattern's a little different than a prohibition. You got what I mean? We do see, as I said later, where there are prohibitions made. How would you respond to someone who uses Jacob as an example of marriage having multiple expressions in the Bible to claim that marriage doesn't have to be between one man and one woman? In other words, what the question is asking is, they got it messed up, and God was okay with it. Can we get it messed up and God be okay with it? Because God has set His rules, His standards. We got to follow what God says. Huh? Well, they do practice that. Some do. But has God given His word on what that means? What's supposed to be done in that? Yeah. One man, one woman. Yeah, and He's been very clear about it, even though man has gotten it wrong so many times and still gets it wrong so many times. Okay? Number 4. How does the Eastern concept of karma compare to what we read about in Scripture, especially in light of Jacob the deceiver being deceived by Laban? What goes around comes around? Yeah, you sow and you reap. Now, when we talk about it again, as I said, it's not the same thing. Karma is not really the biblical understanding. It's sowing and reaping. That's what the Bible says. And karma is kind of like Eastern mysticism that says that if you lived a bad life in this, you're going to get it in the next life and kind of thing. Well, we don't obviously take that. Or that you can have something come back around upon you. The Bible is pretty clear what it is, that nobody's exempt from the principle of sowing and reaping. Nobody is. You sow righteousness, guess what you're going to reap? The results of righteousness, right? You sow ungodliness, you're going to reap the results of it. You may not immediately today get the results of what you did today. You may not get it for a long time, but it will come due eventually. Right? Does that make sense? When you're 180. There you go. Yes, sir.
I think it's kind of good to really thank God for His mercy to it. People really mess up with horrible things. If they're honest with God in their heart and confess it in, like the first God, He forgives their sins. Not saying there aren't some consequences, but God can be a great miracle.
Yeah.
Look at like the Apostle Paul, people killed.
Yeah. There are times where obviously God shows mercy to a person, where they are, you could say, given some bit of a pass on what they did. But let me give you an example where that didn't necessarily show up. David sinning with Bathsheba. He was forgiven, but did it take away the consequences of what would happen for what he did? No, it said that for the rest of his life, the sword, it said, would not be taken away from his family. He would experience the misery of what he did, that one event, or the one set of events that he did, he would experience throughout his family for the rest of his life. Yes. And he lost the child. He lost more than one child. He lost a few children over this whole thing because his own children started slaying each other because of this very event that played out. And he actually got his own kingdom taken away from him because of the threat of the consequence, ultimately, of that event, taken away from him for a time. You remember his son Absalom, who came in and drove him out of his own kingdom? Yeah. So, obviously, there are still consequences for doing wrong, aren't there? Yep. 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 All right, well, let's go ahead and close in prayer. We are done officially. I'm going to ask Brother Wayne if you can close us in prayer for this morning.